Back in February, I read an article in the Morning Sentinel. It was about a group of Masons that were going down to Guatemala to build some stone cook stoves for the indigenous people there. It seemed such a rather interesting thing that I read the whole article, and I wanted to know more. So I got a hold of Pat Manley from Washington, Maine. He's the practicing Mason, and he said, well, I can get a bunch of people together that went down on a trip with me, and we can tell you about what we did and why we did it.
10 years ago, I was enlightened as to a problem that exists in Guatemala. It's not just a Guatemalan problem. It does exist worldwide, but I happen to land in Guatemala, and so that's where I have stayed. The problem that I discovered was that there are thousands and thousands of families, mostly indigenous Maya families that live in the mountains of Guatemala, that use open fires in their homes to do all of their cooking and heating. And it's literally having an open campfire on your floor in the middle of your room. These are mostly small dwellings, generally dirt floors, not any sort of ventilation for these open fires. So smoke accumulates in the room, and everyone that's in the room is exposed to smoke the whole time that they're there. Generally speaking, it's the women and children that breathe those smoke. The men are generally out working in the fields, whatever. The women are usually there cooking, and they usually have the children with them. At the very least, they have the smallest children or babies with them, generally on their back. And these women work over these open fires and are constantly exposed to hot smoke. Smoke is really nothing but billions of little tiny droplets of hot tar. It's gases from the wood fire that did not ignite because the fire is not hot enough. And after a period of exposure for 30 years or 40 years, they get what they call clouds in their eyes, what we would call impaired vision or blindness. The children, the babies that are on their mother's back, get just as much smoke in their faces, just as much smoke in their lungs. Another point to consider about this wood smoke inside of dwellings is that at higher elevations, such as 10,000 feet, there's less oxygen in the air. And the human body, your blood, actually has an affinity for carbon monoxide. So when the inhabitants are breathing smoke, they're in an atmosphere that is short of oxygen to begin with, and their lungs, the blood in their lungs is absorbing the toxic carbon monoxide instead of the oxygen. So they don't just have respiratory illnesses, literally their entire body is being poisoned by carbon monoxide. I was really quite moved by my experience and decided that I was going to continue to do this, that I would come back down the next year, that I would raise some money and gather together some other interested people, possibly some Masons, some friends of mine, to go back down to Guatemala and build stoves again the next year, which is what I did, and which is what I've been doing for the past 10 years. I have a group of volunteers, anywhere from 15 to 25 people. Sometimes they're from Maine, sometimes they're from Canada, sometimes they're from all over the country. I have volunteers from as far away as California, Washington State. I've had volunteers from Europe, from Austria, a lot of volunteers from Canada, Nova Scotia, a lot of repeat volunteers. I have a number of volunteers that have been going down with me a number of times, 5, 6 times, 7 times, over the course of the past 10 years. Over the past 10 years, we also have been working with local Maya Masons in the villages, and we try to train some of them to help us build these stoves, not only to help us build these stoves while we're in Guatemala, building the stoves each year, but also so that they can build stoves during the year when we're not there. So the local Maya really build the majority of the stoves that we have funded and had built over the course of the past 10 years. And we have funded and built roughly 1,500 stoves in the past 10 years.
Okay, hi, I'm Pauline Johnstone. I live in Camden, Maine, and I'm a registered nurse, and I've been on 3 trips with Masons on a Mission down to Guatemala. And for the last 14 years, I've been going on medical trips to Guatemala and Honduras. And we've treated people over that time for respiratory problems, eye problems, and a multitude of other things from indoor fires. And we're only able to treat the symptoms that people have, but with the Masons on a Mission and providing these stoves, it gets to the root cause of the problems with indoor fires. They're small people, and I often wonder if part of it is from the exposure to the carbon monoxide that they have over the course of their lives. And you see them with really rosy cheeks, and some of that could be from the carbon monoxide too. One other thing is that the women of Guatemala are famous for their weavings and their working with cloth and beautiful colors and patterns. And as the smoke accumulates, the effects of it accumulate in their eyes, it takes away their ability to be able to produce some of those beautiful weavings and cloth. One of the other problems with the freestone fires that are on the floor is that children can trip and fall right into the fire, and we've experienced seeing children who have massive scars on their arms from having fallen into the fires. Children with epilepsy who aren't treated might have seizures and roll into the fire. Seen that there. So it's another reason to get the fires up off of the floor and provide more safety for the family. Because if they fall and roll into a fire, it's very different than kind of leaning against a whole stove. You're going to have some serious burns.
My name is Jesse Stevens. I am from Sweden, Maine, and I am a potter and a builder. And this past year was my first time joining the Masons on a Mission trip to Guatemala, but I have actually taken several trips to Guatemala previously and spent just about 9 months to a year of time down there all together. Guatemala is quite a remarkable little country with a lot of diversity in both the land and the people. The Mayan folk lead pretty simple lives overall. They're doing a lot of agriculture, growing their own food. Mostly it's corn and beans, and they usually there's a few chickens running around in the dooryards of the houses that we were working at. We saw pigs grazing amongst the coffee plants outside the village. And despite the poverty, they seem to have some richness of community that we could take some learning from. The family bond is really strong there, and it's just wonderful to go down there and see that. Sometimes I wish that we could learn from that here on our side.
I'm Kathleen King. I live in Hollowell, Maine, and I work at the University of Maine at Augusta. I first learned about Masons on a Mission when I was serving in the honors program as a student at UMA about 5 years ago, and found that the University of Maine at Augusta honors program had been donating money to the stove project for a year or two. And so we maintained that for every year. We would donate $150 from the student association, feeling like buying one stove for one family was really doing a lot. And we had actually been introduced to the program by a professor who wanted to remain anonymous, so he would match our donation every year. So after a couple of years, we would be talking about it every winter and discussing the value of it and Masons on a Mission. And in the fall, a couple of years ago, one of our human services professors came to us and she said, I've been wanting to go to Guatemala and I can't find enough people to go. And do you think you can get 10 people to go to Guatemala? So, we found that we had this connection with Masons on a Mission and decided a year and a half ago to go to Guatemala. About 10 or 11 of us went down.
My name's David Engler. I live in Bodenham, Maine. I'm an engineer by profession, but I've enjoyed working with my hands, building things for many, many years. I first got interested in Guatemala a couple of years ago when my son joined the Peace Corps and was assigned in Guatemala. Finally ended up calling Pat and saying, "Hey, Pat, I'm interested in going. Can I sign on?" Pat said, "Sure." So that's kind of how we got involved in the trip. And a couple of things we've talked about the medical issues, but there's a real environmental problem that occurs in the Mayan highlands. The use of the open fires is a very, very inefficient use of the firewood, and it's really contributed to deforestation of the region. And the masonry stoves are so much more efficient that it really is helping to solve the environmental problem and the deforestation problem. And that's just one more merit of the whole program. The other point I'd like to make is, it sounds like, oh yes, we're going and doing this great thing for these poor people that need our help. Well, the simple reality is I get a lot more out of it. I receive a lot more from what I have learned from the people that we have worked with in Guatemala than they get from us. Really, we're the beneficiaries of this, and I certainly look forward to going with Pat and the Masons on a Mission next year.
So the construction of the estufas, as they're called down there, which is simply Spanish for stove, they're really a fairly simple project. It's not rocket science. It's very basic. We're just using cement blocks, bricks, sand, mortar and cement, and stovepipes. But they're, it's very basic. We go into a dwelling, and most of the dwellings have dirt floors, and most of them aren't very level. And we often spend the first hour in a dwelling just making the ground where the stove is going to go level so that we can build on it. We don't pour footings or anything down there. There's the ground in the dwellings is generally packed down pretty well. The people live there. They're walking in it all the time. The animals are walking on it all the time.
Pat Manley went on to describe the process in detail about how these simple, life-saving cook stoves were built, as you can see from the brief slideshow you're watching now. Norma and Paul Bizoka, two more volunteers, also showed up later to relate their experiences with Masons on a Mission. Pat is always looking for a few good volunteers. You can contact Patrick at 207-845-2440, or you can email him at jpmanley@midcoast.com. If you wish to help them out, their address is Masons on a Mission, 15 Nelson Ridge South, Washington, Maine, 04574, and their website is www.midcoast.com/Masons on a Mission.